Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Marilyn M and I'm here today with an original tag by Tristan from L Space Books, and I'll have their information down below. I thought this would be an easy peasy tag. I wasn't expecting to do a tag today. It only has 2 prompts, so I thought, what could be wrong? But it's the roadmap of your life tag, and I'll be 74 in August. And I've lived a lot of places in my life and time. Well, the 2 questions, I'll just read the first one. What is a book that reminds you or takes place in each place that you've lived? This could mean country, state, province, city, town, or apartment house. Just come up with a book that really resonates with you and the time you spent in each place where you've had a mailing address. There's no way I can do that in a reasonable amount of time. I've lived in many countries. I've lived in a few states, but I thought I would give you the places and the books that resonated with me the most. And for that, where did I start out? Well, when I was 4 years old, I moved to the Williamsburg projects. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because my favorite author, and I have all of her main books, is Betty Smith. And this is the anniversary edition of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which I've talked about a lot, but I also talked about her book Maggie Now, and let me show you. These are the old books that I got for $2, $3, and a book that one of my subscribers, Nathan, really enjoyed, Tomorrow Will Be Better. Very old, very good. And a book that I read in my teenage years, Joy in the Morning. And all of these books are autobiographical. But to give you a sense of place, I thought I would show you the place I grew up. And it's a picture in my own out-of-print book, From Agoraphobia to Zen. And this is the Williamsburg projects. It's not a very clear picture, but I'm going to read you from my book. So please forgive me for that. On June 24th, 2003, the Williamsburg Houses was designated a New York City landmark, comparable to the Chrysler Building and Grand Central Station. I moved there in 1954 at the age of 4, and even then I knew it was special. The circular room layout from the kitchen around to the living room, separated by foyers, reminded me as much as the country-like setting. The first day we moved in, I said, "So many doors," and wandered around in a daze, opening and closing them. "There are 20 doors, Mommy," I said, as she smiled her rare smile that brought me joy because I'd caused it. I played train in the long foyer near the front door when my mother cleaned the kitchen floor. Lining the chairs back to back, I was both the conductor and the passenger, acting out the variety of characters who inhabited my project world. What I learned later was the project's overseer was Richard H. Shreve, an architect who worked on the Empire State Building. The head designer, William Lescaz, was a Swiss-born designer obsessed with the European modernist style and was determined to bring it to the United States. This style, later called Art Deco, was first introduced at the Paris exhibition of 1925. And elegantly modern, it reminded me of the Fred Astaire movies I would add to my obsessions in my 20s. 4 acres of tan brick 4-story buildings decorated with blue panels and doorways covered with aluminum marquees became the most progressive and biggest housing project in Brooklyn, advanced and different from the large brick housing projects set back from patches of skimpy lawn that represented the time. The time was 1938, and 12 slum blocks depicted in the book A Tree Grows in Brooklyn would be razed. The people living in the cold railroad flats, a series of rooms connected to each other in a line similar to a railway car, would now have hot water, steam heat, free electricity, and safety. But back then in 1939, in the architectural journal Pencil Points, author and architect Talbot F. Hamlin said of the Williamsburg houses, "It offers more of the amenities of good housing than many Park Avenue apartments lack in air, in light, in green, and growing in humanity and decency." And the reason I read all of that was because that's where A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and Francie of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn lived, in those cold water flats. And that book and all of her books resonated with me because they were exact place and the exact street names of where I was brought up. So you will see Stagg Street. I was brought up on Stagg Walk. You'll see Skoll Street, Leonard Street. These are the places that were raised, the flats that were raised to help the people, like Francie, and all the poverty that was there at the time. And that poverty, as well as hope, is what's depicted in all of Betty Smith's books. And they have resonated with me and with my life. So I wanted to talk about that first. So I really recommend that you read all of Betty Smith's books. They're all autobiographical in some way. She said that herself. And there's a connection with another author with Betty Smith that I'm going to talk about in a minute. The next two books I'm going to talk about, one I haven't read and one I read a long time ago, were the only books that my mother had in her bookcase. We had a very small bookcase, and my mother used the library that she was brought up during World War II, and to learn about what was happening in Japan at that time was very interesting to her. So, betrothed to a military attaché in Peking, 20-year-old Mary Mackenzie set sail for China with a frugal trousseau and a suffocating chaperone. But Mary, a young Scotswoman, is lively, curious, unspoiled. The year is 1903, and it will not be long before she scandalizes the British in Peking by falling into an adulterous affair with a young Japanese nobleman. Her odyssey begins in earnest when she is torn from a small daughter and turned out of the European community. How she survives in an ancient Eastern culture that barely tolerates women, much less Westerners, is the story of The Ginger Tree, a compelling novel that spans more than 40 tumultuous years in the Far East, including 2 world wars and the cataclysmic Tokyo earthquake of 1923. So I enjoyed this book. My mother loved it. So if you can pick it up, I recommend it. So those are the 2 books that were in my house in the housing project that I just told you about. During my teenage years, I was very much involved in theater, music, and singing. And one of the plays that we did in our Williamsburg Players was a play by Josephina Nigley. And the play that we did was Soldadera, a play of the Mexican Revolution, which was really interesting because most of our group, our theater group, were Puerto Rican, as I was. And there was a cast member called the blonde one, but I didn't play her. I played Adelita, the youngest one. So I'll just say the scene. A soldiers camp in the spring of the year 1914 in the Sierra Madre Mountains near the capital city of Saltillo in the northern state of Coahuila, Mexico. It is really a mountain pass, and there is a path that begins at the rear right and leads up out left. So I'm not going to tell you too much else about it, except that I had a good part. I don't want to spoil it. But who is Josefina Nigli? She was an accomplished playwright, novelist, screenwriter, and teacher. In the theater, she was associated with the San Antonio Little Theatre, the Carolina Players, and the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, Ireland. As a screenwriter, she worked for 20th Century Fox and MGM, where she adapted her novel Mexican Village for the screen. Nigli was a faculty member of the University of North Carolina for more than 2 decades at Western Carolina University, where a campus theater is named for her. And she was born in 1910, died in 1983, and she's the most successful Mexican-American writers of the early 20th century. Born of European parents and raised in Mexico, she spent most of her adult life in the United States. And in her plays and novels, she aimed to portray authentic Mexican experiences for English-speaking audiences. And this is the cover, and it has the complete plays of Josefina Nigli, edited by William Orchard and Yolanda Padilla. And I said there is a link between Josefina Nigli and Betty Smith, because they both studied, I think, at the North Carolina University. So there's that. And the second book that affected me in my teenage life was by Piri Thomas, Down These Mean Streets, and I'll try to have a copy over here. So Down These Mean Streets is a memoir by Piri Thomas, a Latino of Puerto Rican and Cuban descent who grew up in Spanish Harlem, a section of Harlem with a large Puerto Rican population. The book follows Piri through the first few decades of his life, lives in poverty, joins and fights with street gangs, faces racism in both New York City and elsewhere, travels, succumbs to heroin addiction, gets involved in crime, is imprisoned, and is finally released. Now, this is the important thing that really drew me in also. One of the major themes of Down These Mean Streets centers on Piri Thomas's identity as a dark-complexioned Puerto Rican. Although he is of Puerto Rican and Cuban heritage, he is seen as black rather than Hispanic or Latino. His own family rejects the African aspect of their Latino Caribbean ancestry, causing Piri to spend much of his youth and early adult life contemplating his racial and ethnic identity. And I had sort of the same problem in opposite. I was Puerto Rican, white Puerto Rican, and Jewish, but my mother was the dark person, my father was white. But I also had trouble with cultural identity all my life. And in my teenage years, I acted out. I also joined a gang for a short period of time, believe it or not. My gang name was Tiny, in case you wanted to know. Tiny Terror. But anyway, I never took drugs, and I never had all of his experiences, of course, being with the racism. Though I had trouble being accepted by both of my cultural identities, and that led me to be a people pleaser and do things just to be accepted in. In this point, it was in a Puerto Rican neighborhood, so I was trying to be accepted in my own neighborhood. There have been times that I was trying to be accepted in the Jewish part of my family, but since we lived in different sections of Brooklyn, it was, I felt very Puerto Rican. I wanted long earrings and to dress just like my Puerto Rican friends. So I did have problems with cultural identity, and Piri Thomas's book is a wonderful book. I think there was a 25th anniversary edition where he talks about what happened since the book. There's also another book another part of his memoir that talks about what happened to him. Not as popular, and I'll try to have the title down below because it escapes my mind right now. So, everybody asks me, how did you get to Hawaii? And there's no book that I can point to. What got me to Hawaii was the movie South Pacific. I saw this movie when I was 12 years old, and I was mesmerized by the place. It just was something that really spoke to me and said, you have to live here. And I said to myself, I said, wherever this place is, because I didn't know, I told my friends, I'm going to move there. And they all, chuckled at me. I was 12, and I looked to the end of the movie, and it said filmed in Kauai, Hawaii. And I said, one day I will live in Kauai. Well, when I came here in 1976 to Hawaii, it wasn't to Kauai. I did live in Kauai for 5 years, but at first it was Honolulu. But I still felt that feeling when I first came here that I felt when I was 12 and watched the movie. So that's what brought me. Oh, and other things that brought me. It was a lot of crime at that time in New York City. I didn't want my children. I was divorced with 2 children. I didn't want them to be brought up in what was then a crime-ridden New York, and unfortunately it's happening again. But I really, that's why I came to Hawaii. So it has nothing to do with books. But I did read the book by James Michener, Hawaii, before I left. And I listened to a lot of music because music has always been part of my life. So I can't say there's a book really that brought me. What actually brought me to Hawaii was a neighbor that I lived when I lived in Brooklyn at that time in the 70s, and her daughter went to Hawaii on a nurses convention, and she came back and told me this is a really wonderful place to raise children. And as impulsive as I was, I bought a one-way ticket, which was very expensive at that time. I was working, and I worked for a year and saved up money, and I didn't know anybody, and I went on a one-way ticket to Honolulu. So, and the rest is history. So what other books? After I went to Hawaii, I wanted to continue my education, which I did and got my 2-year degree, but I wanted to have a 4-year degree, and I got a scholarship to a Minnesota university. And that's where I think when I went to my college, which is called Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, Minnesota, that's where I started reading books that were more literary in nature. So I have to say that I have more books about Minnesota than almost any other place. And of course, when I was young, I read the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairies book, but I read that before I went to Minnesota. What I read in Minnesota were James Baldwin, Giovanni's Room, and also August Wilson. August Wilson was a playwright, and I'm going to read you something about that I read in NPR News. It says, before Fences, August Wilson was a poet and a St. Paulite. NPR News. And all of his plays are in book form as well, and I love to read plays. That's one of my pleasures. I love to see plays, but it's very expensive to see a play because when they come to Hawaii, they have to bring all their stuff, all across the Pacific Ocean, and it's very expensive. So what does it say about August Wilson? While 9 of the 10 plays by Wilson's Pulitzer Prize winning Pittsburgh cycle was set in his hometown, only Ma Rainey's Black Bottom was set outside the city in Chicago. Bellamy said he can always detect the presence of St. Paul, Minnesota, in Wilson's work. I heard him say that he heard the voices from Pittsburgh much more clearly in St. Paul than in Pittsburgh. He was born and raised and told the stories of Pittsburgh, but found his voice as a playwright in St. Paul, where he lived from 1978 until 1990. And one of the books, one of the plays that he wrote that was set in Chicago is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And I'll try to have that over here. It's about a blues singer, Ma Rainey, who is putting on a show and is faced with the racism and difficulties. And I think this was in the 30s that African Americans dealt with from the time they came till even now. So, and I really recommend all of August Wilson's plays because the dialogue is wonderful. Fences, I think, was made into a movie. So, yeah, that's good. And I wanted to mention that his poetry is really awesome too. So try to look for that because he was a poet before he was a playwright. When I came to Hawaii, I read mostly nonfiction. So when I lived in Hawaii, I read mostly mysteries and nonfiction, and I'm not going to talk about, that's where I really got into Agatha Christie, though I had read all of her books before. But I wanted to mention one book only because I met the author, and he was a doctor in my town, and his name is Terry Shintani, and his book is The Hawaii Diet. He also has a Hawaii cookbook, and I had originally met Dr. Shintani. I met him twice. I met him when he was treating my partner, my ex-husband who passed away. He had a heart condition, and that's where I first met him. And he was trying to get my ex-husband to change his diet into a plant-based diet. But I think it affected me more than it affected him. But it's more than that. He had a program that worked with the Native Hawaiians, and it was a very wonderful experiment that he did. The Hawaii Diet by Sherry Shintani, with donations from community groups and help from volunteers. Shintani gathered a group of overweight Native Hawaiians in 1989, and that's from my town, by the way, and put them on the diet. He says, Western nutritionists used to say poi was bad for you. Shintani said, it just goes to show there's more to traditional knowledge than what you might think. Each member of the group lost an average of 17 pounds in the 3-week program and were able to reduce the amount of medicine they were taking due in part to lower cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood sugar levels. But even more important than that, he used the Hawaiian native culture to take the Native Hawaiians from the processed food that they were given in cans, etc., like Spam, etc., and back to when they had their autonomy. And he says, in my work with the Native Hawaiian community, I have had the privilege of being in close contact with Native Hawaiian healers. I have some training in Oriental medicine. He says Oriental medicine, but I guess he could say that because he's Japanese. I would say Asian medicine, and to my great delight, I found that the fundamental principles I had learned in my training were very similar to those of the native healers of ancient Hawaii. This was further evidence to me that the truths found and these ancient principles were universal and they apply to all peoples. So I really suggest this book, not only because of the diet, which it didn't make me a vegetarian at that time, but it really taught me that eating food in its natural state is really beneficial, because the American diet, they call it SAD, standard American diet, is mostly processed, and it really helped me because I was really overweight at that time too. And then I met him again because he opened up a health clinic, and that's when he signed this to me, and it says, "To Marilyn, I wish you the best of health and the Lord's blessing always. June 19th, 2012. So, yeah, I recommend this book, and I will keep it forever. So, is that the end of the places that I've been? Well, I lived in Spain and Japan, but in Spain I was more interested in dancing, and I spent all my time dancing. And in Japan I was busy teaching. So only the books that I've had, that I've shown you from those places, are only the ones I'm going to talk about, but I've talked long enough. Now, the last question of this tag is, since a road map not only shows where you've been, but also where you're going, what is a book that reminds you or takes place in your next destination, or a place you'd like to live in? I don't think I want to live in any other place but Hawaii, but I've just come back from Canada, and if I had to pick a place to live in, it would be Victoria, Canada. Yes, I was a little cold, I have to admit, but I really didn't have the proper clothes for what I thought was going to be a warm spring in Canada. And it wasn't that rainy, but it was kind of cool for me anyway. But I sure would like to spend my summers there. I wouldn't mind. And I didn't want to mention one book because there's a lot of books that I've been being introduced to by the many wonderful Canadian booktubers. And in fact, we're going to read a book. I'm going to read a book with Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads, and Sarah Wallace of Roadworthy, the Diviners. And I don't have it with me, but I'll try to have a copy over here to show you. But we're going to do a buddy read together. And I always love buddy reads. Thank you so much for listening to this a little bit drawn out, overindulgent, self-indulgent tag. But I forgot to tell you, I was tagged by Pat from Book Chat with Pat, and she tagged a whole bunch of people that I would have tagged. But I did come up with some people to tag, and I'm going to tag Freddie from Sluggish Reader. I'm going to tag Priscilla from Evening Reader, Emily from Novell Novels, and Jack from Spread Book Joy. So I do have a very wonderful book haul coming up for you the end of the week. But I had to do this tag because it made me think about all the places that I've been to and how the books that stayed with me have to do with the places that I've been. So if you want to do this tag, please do it. Thank you, Tristan, for creating such an original tag, and I'll have their information down below. So until we meet again, I wish you a happy week, and I will see you soon. Aloha.